8th of January, 2017, something extraordinary happened inside a small white dome perched on the barren slopes of Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii. 6 scientists, carefully selected from thousands of applicants, had been living together in complete isolation for exactly 8 months. They were simulating life on Mars. NASA was watching. The world was watching. And then, without warning, everything fell apart. One crew member suffered a psychological breakdown so severe that the entire mission had to be paused. The person could not sleep. They could not eat. They described feeling as though the walls were closing in, as though the air itself had become hostile. And here is the terrifying part. They were still on Earth. They could walk outside any time they wanted. They knew their families were just a phone call away. They knew rescue was minutes away, not months. And still, the human mind cracked under the pressure of merely pretending to be on Mars. Now imagine what would happen if it were real. Imagine there was no dome to step out of. Imagine there was no blue sky waiting beyond the walls. Imagine the rescue was not minutes away, but 7 months away at minimum. Imagine the air outside would kill you in approximately 90 seconds. Imagine the nearest hospital was 55 million kilometers away. This is not science fiction. This is the actual reality of Mars colonization. And today, we are going to have one of the most important conversations that no one seems to be having honestly. We are going to talk about why colonizing Mars, this grand, beautiful, inspiring dream that billionaires sell us and movies romanticize and headlines celebrate, is fundamentally, scientifically, and perhaps permanently, a beautiful lie we tell ourselves. Now, before we go any further, let me be absolutely clear about what this video is and what it is not. This is not pessimism. This is not anti-science. This is science. Pure, raw, unfiltered science. Every single claim I make today will be backed by peer-reviewed research, actual experimental data, and the findings of scientists who have dedicated their entire lives to understanding space. I have no agenda here. I am not trying to make you feel hopeless. I am not trying to diminish the incredible achievements of space exploration. What I am trying to do is give you something far more valuable than hope. I am trying to give you truth. Because truth, even when it is uncomfortable, is always more useful than a beautiful fantasy. In the next 90 minutes or so, we're going to journey through the physics of space radiation, the biology of human deterioration in low gravity, the psychology of extreme isolation, the engineering impossibilities of terraforming, the economics that make no mathematical sense, the gravitational trap that no one discusses publicly, and finally, the philosophical question of whether this beautiful lie might still serve a purpose. We will examine every angle, we will leave no stone unturned, and by the end, you will understand Mars not as the romantic frontier of human destiny, but as the incredibly hostile alien world it actually is. So let me start by telling you a story. A real story. A story that changed my entire understanding of what Mars colonization actually means for the human body. In March of 2015, astronaut Scott Kelly boarded the International Space Station for what would become a 340-day mission. His identical twin brother, Mark Kelly, remained on Earth. NASA designed this as the perfect experiment. 2 genetically identical humans. One in space. One on Earth. Compare the differences after 1 year. The results, published in the journal Science on April 12, 2019, were nothing short of alarming. Scott Kelly's telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes that indicate biological aging, changed dramatically during spaceflight. His gene expression altered. Over 8,000 genes changed their activity levels. His cognitive function declined. His immune system behaved differently. His gut microbiome shifted. His carotid artery thickened. His retinal nerve thickened. And perhaps most disturbing of all, many of these changes did not fully reverse even after he returned to Earth. Now here is what makes this relevant to our Mars conversation. Scott Kelly was in low Earth orbit. He was protected by Earth's magnetosphere, the invisible magnetic shield that deflects the most dangerous forms of cosmic radiation. He was only 340 kilometers above the surface. He could see Earth every 90 minutes as the station orbited. Supplies arrived regularly. Communication was nearly instantaneous. Medical support was available. And still, his body deteriorated significantly. A Mars mission would be incomparably worse. A trip to Mars takes approximately 7 months each way. The stay on the surface would be at minimum 500 days to wait for the orbital alignment that allows a return trip. Total mission time, approximately 2.5 to 3 years, and unlike the International Space Station, there is no magnetosphere protecting you from galactic cosmic rays. There is no resupply ship, there is no emergency return, there is no real-time communication with doctors on Earth. Everything that happened to Scott Kelly would happen to Mars astronauts, but amplified, extended, and without the safety net. If you are finding this fascinating, if your mind is already racing with questions, then you are exactly the kind of person this content is made for. Take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we are about to go so deep into this topic that you will never look at Mars the same way again. Drop a comment telling me what you think the biggest obstacle to Mars colonization is. I genuinely read every comment, and your perspective matters to me. Now let us continue this journey. Let us talk about radiation. Because radiation is perhaps the single most underestimated threat to any Mars colonization plan, and it is a threat for which we currently have no solution. Not a difficult solution. Not an expensive solution. No solution at all. Here on Earth, we live inside a protective bubble. Our planet generates a powerful magnetic field through the dynamo effect of its rotating molten iron core. This magnetosphere extends thousands of kilometers into space, deflecting charged particles from the Sun and from deep space. On top of that, we have a thick atmosphere, equivalent to 10 meters of water in terms of radiation shielding. We are so well protected that the average person on Earth receives approximately 2.4 millisieverts of radiation per year from natural background sources. Now let us talk about Mars. Mars has no global magnetic field. It lost its magnetosphere approximately 4 billion years ago when its core cooled and solidified. Without a magnetic field, the solar wind has been stripping away the Martian atmosphere for billions of years. What remains is less than 1% the thickness of Earth's atmosphere. This means that anyone standing on the surface of Mars is exposed to two primary forms of dangerous radiation. The first is solar particle events. These are bursts of high-energy protons released during solar flares and coronal mass ejections. They can deliver lethal doses of radiation within hours if you are unshielded. The second, and far more dangerous in the long term, is galactic cosmic rays. These are incredibly high-energy particles, mostly protons and heavy ions, that originate from supernova explosions throughout our galaxy. They travel at nearly the speed of light. And here is what makes them so terrifying. They are almost impossible to shield against. You see, when a galactic cosmic ray hits a material like aluminum, which is what spacecraft are typically made of, it does not simply stop. Instead, it undergoes a process called nuclear fragmentation, or spallation. The incoming particle shatters the atomic nuclei of the shielding material, creating a shower of secondary particles. These secondary particles, called neutrons and lighter ions, can actually be more biologically damaging than the original cosmic ray. So adding more aluminum shielding can, paradoxically, make the radiation problem worse beyond a certain thickness. The data from NASA's Mars Science Laboratory, which carried the radiation assessment detector to Mars, aboard the Curiosity rover in 2012 showed that the radiation dose on the Martian surface is approximately 0.67 millisieverts per day. That translates to approximately 244 millisieverts per year just from being on the surface. During the transit to Mars, the dose rate is even higher because you lack even the minimal atmospheric shielding Mars provides. The total mission dose for a round trip to Mars with a surface stay has been estimated at approximately 1.01 sieverts. To put that in perspective, NASA's current career radiation exposure limit for astronauts is 1 sievert. A single Mars mission would consume an astronaut's entire lifetime radiation allowance, and that is for a visit. A colony implies permanent residence. After just 4 years on Mars, you would have absorbed approximately 1 full sievert just from surface radiation alone, not counting any solar particle events. After 10 years, 2.5 sieverts. After 20 years, 5 sievert. The cancer mortality risk becomes not a possibility but a near certainty. Research published in the journal Nature in May of 2017 by scientists at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas found something even more alarming. Using mouse models exposed to charged particle radiation similar to galactic cosmic rays, they discovered that cancer risks from space radiation had been significantly underestimated. The radiation did not just damage DNA directly, it also altered the microenvironment around cells, making previously healthy cells more likely to become cancerous. The researchers called this a non-targeted effect. It meant that even cells that were not directly hit by radiation could become cancerous because the cells around them had been damaged and were sending distress signals that disrupted normal tissue function. The lead researcher, Francis Cucinotta, who formerly served as NASA's Chief Radiation Health Officer, stated publicly that the cancer risk from a Mars mission could be 2 to 3 times higher than previous models had predicted. So what are the proposed solutions? Let us examine each one honestly. The first proposal is to build habitats underground, dig into the Martian surface and use several meters of regolith as shielding. This would indeed work from a radiation perspective. But think about what this means for colonization. You are not living on Mars, you are living under Mars. You would spend your entire existence in artificial tunnels and caves, never able to walk on the surface without significant radiation risk. The psychological implications of this are enormous, and we will discuss them in detail later. The second proposal is water shielding. Surrounding habitats with thick walls of water can effectively block radiation, but water is extraordinarily heavy to transport from Earth, and extracting enough water on Mars to create meaningful shielding for an entire colony is an engineering challenge of staggering proportions. The third proposal is pharmaceutical countermeasures. Developing drugs that could protect against radiation damage or enhance DNA repair mechanisms. This is an active area of research, but as of the most recent publications, no such drug exists that provides meaningful protection against chronic galactic cosmic ray exposure. The fourth proposal is magnetic shielding. Creating an artificial magnetosphere around a habitat or even around all of Mars. The energy requirements for this are currently beyond our technological capability by many orders of magnitude. A 2021 paper in the journal Acta Astronautica estimated that creating even a localized magnetic shield strong enough to deflect galactic cosmic rays would require superconducting magnets of extraordinary size and power. With mass that would be essentially impossible to transport to Mars with current or near-future rocket technology. The radiation problem alone should give us enormous pause, but it is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Because even if we somehow solved radiation completely, the human body faces another equally devastating challenge on Mars. And this one is literally built into the fabric of space-time itself. It is gravity. Or more precisely, the lack of it. Mars has approximately 38% of Earth's gravitational pull. For a long time, this was considered an advantage. Lower gravity means structures can be built taller with less material, lifting heavy objects is easier, moving around requires less energy. It sounds almost pleasant, but the human body did not evolve for 38% gravity. It evolved for 100% Earth gravity over millions of years. Every bone in your skeleton, every muscle in your body, every chamber of your heart, every valve in your circulatory system, the fluid pressure in your eyes, the density of your bones, the strength of your spine, all of it is calibrated precisely for Earth's gravitational environment. And we know from decades of research on the International Space Station what happens when gravity is removed entirely. In microgravity, astronauts lose 1 to 2% of their bone mineral density per month, primarily in weight-bearing bones like the spine, hips and legs. Their muscles atrophy at a rate of approximately 5% per week in the early stages. Their cardiovascular system deconditions because the heart no longer needs to pump blood upward against gravity. The total blood volume decreases. The baroreceptors in the neck, which regulate blood pressure based on posture, become confused. Fluid shifts toward the head, increasing intracranial pressure. This increased pressure on the optic nerve is believed to be responsible for a condition called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, which has affected more than 2/3 of astronauts on long-duration missions. Some have experienced permanent vision changes. Now here is the critical question that no one has a definitive answer to. What happens at 38% gravity? Is it enough to prevent these problems? Is it just as bad as microgravity? Is it somewhere in between? The honest answer is, we do not know. We have extensive data for microgravity from the International Space Station. We have extensive data for Earth gravity. We have literally zero long-term data for anything in between. No human being has ever lived for extended periods in partial gravity. We have never built a centrifuge in space large enough to simulate Mars gravity for months or years. We are proposing to send people to live permanently in a gravitational environment whose effects on the human body we have never studied. This is one of the most extraordinary oversights in all of space exploration planning. We are talking about spending hundreds of billions of dollars to send humans to Mars, and we have not conducted the basic fundamental research to determine whether the human body can remain healthy in Martian gravity. A 2020 study published in the journal Frontiers in Physiology attempted to extrapolate from microgravity data to predict partial gravity effects. Their conclusion was deeply unsettling. Even at 38% gravity, bone loss would likely continue, though at a reduced rate compared to microgravity. Muscle atrophy would still occur. Cardiovascular deconditioning would still happen. The fluid shifts might be partially mitigated but not eliminated. Their models suggested that after several years in Martian gravity, a colonist might experience 20 to 40% of the deterioration seen in microgravity. That is still enormously significant. 20% bone loss in weight-bearing bones over a decade would make fractures commonplace. It would make osteoporosis inevitable for long-term residents. And then there is the question nobody wants to talk about. The question that makes the entire concept of a self-sustaining Mars colony fundamentally problematic. What about children? A self-sustaining colony, by definition, must reproduce. Humans must be born on Mars, grow up on Mars, live their entire lives on Mars. But what happens to a developing fetus in 38% gravity? What happens to growing bones that have never experienced full Earth gravity? What happens to a developing cardiovascular system that forms in reduced gravity? We have essentially no data on this. The few animal reproduction studies conducted in microgravity have shown alarming results. A 2009 study on mice embryos in simulated microgravity showed significant developmental abnormalities, A study on fish embryos aboard the International Space Station showed altered development of the vestibular system. But again, these are microgravity studies, not partial gravity studies. We simply do not know what happens to human fetal development in Martian gravity. But let us engage in a thought experiment. Let us assume that children can be born and develop on Mars. What kind of humans would they become? Growing up in 38% gravity, their bones would be less dense than Earth humans. Their muscles would be weaker. Their cardiovascular system would be adapted to lower gravitational stress. Their entire physiology would be calibrated for Mars. And this creates what I call the gravitational trap. A person born and raised on Mars might never be able to visit Earth. Earth's gravity would be crushing to them. Their bones might fracture under their own weight. Their heart might not be able to pump blood effectively against full gravity. Their spine might compress painfully. They would be, in a very real physiological sense, a different kind of human. Adapted to Mars, trapped on Mars, unable to return to the homeworld of their species. Is this colonization? Or is this exile? Is this expansion of humanity? Or is this fragmentation of humanity into subspecies separated by gravitational adaptation? These are not philosophical questions. These are biological inevitabilities if Mars colonization were to succeed across generations. Let me take you now into perhaps the most underappreciated aspect of this entire discussion. The human mind. Because you can engineer solutions for radiation. You can theoretically develop countermeasures for bone loss. You can design pressurized habitats and life support systems. But you cannot engineer the human psyche. And the human psyche was built for Earth in ways so fundamental that we are only beginning to understand them. In June of 2010, 6 men entered a sealed facility in Moscow, Russia, for what would become the longest isolation experiment in history. It was called Mars 500. The mission was designed to simulate the full duration of a Mars round trip, 520 days. The crew consisted of highly educated, carefully screened, psychologically tested volunteers. They knew they could leave at any time. They knew they were in Moscow. They knew their families were safe. And still, what happened inside that facility over the next 17 months was deeply troubling. 4 of the 6 crew members developed significant sleep disorders. Their circadian rhythms drifted. One crew member became almost completely nocturnal, sleeping during the day and lying awake at night. Another developed what researchers described as behavioral hibernation, becoming increasingly inactive, spending more and more time in bed, withdrawing from social interaction, responding to questions with minimal answers. The crew's cognitive performance declined measurably over the course of the mission. Reaction time slowed. Problem-solving ability decreased. Interpersonal conflicts increased. Communication with mission control, which was subjected to artificial time delays to simulate the Mars communication lag, became increasingly terse and sometimes hostile. A study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in February of 2013, analysing the Mars 500 data, found that crew members displayed what researchers called behavioural monotony. Their movements became repetitive, their daily routines became rigid, their emotional range narrowed. They were, in a sense, shutting down, not physically. Psychologically, their minds were entering a kind of protective torpor, reducing activity and engagement as a coping mechanism against the relentless sameness of their environment. And remember, these men knew it was a simulation. They knew the door could open at any time. They knew the outside world was right there, beyond the walls. On actual Mars, there is no door. There is no outside world. There is only the infinite rust-coloured desert of a dead planet, and the knowledge that Earth is a tiny dot in the sky that gets smaller and smaller as the months pass. The psychological research on extreme isolation and confinement paints a remarkably consistent picture across different settings, whether submarines, Antarctic stations, space stations, or isolation experiments. After approximately 4 to 6 months of confinement, human beings begin to show predictable psychological deterioration. Depression rates increase dramatically. Anxiety becomes chronic. Irritability escalates into conflict. Motivation decreases. Sleep quality deteriorates. And a phenomenon called third quarter syndrome emerges, where the psychological low point typically occurs about 3/4 of the way through a known finite mission. But here is the key insight. On Mars, there is no finite mission. For colonists, it is permanent. There is no 3/4 mark, because there is no end. The psychological burden of forever is fundamentally different from the burden of a known duration. No human being has ever been permanently confined to a small habitat with no possibility of return to the wider world. We have no psychological data on what that does to the human mind over years and decades. But extrapolating from what we know about shorter durations, the prognosis is not encouraging. Let us add communication delay to this picture. Depending on the orbital positions of Earth and Mars, radio signals take between 4 and 24 minutes to travel between the two planets. This means no real-time communication, no phone calls, no video chats. If you send a message to your family on Earth, you wait between 8 and 48 minutes for a response. If you have a psychological crisis, there is no therapist who can talk you through it in real time. If you have a medical emergency, there is no doctor on Earth who can guide you step by step. The fundamental human need for immediate social connection with the broader world is completely severed. You are limited to the handful of people in your habitat. And if your relationships with those people deteriorate, which isolation research tells us is nearly inevitable over long durations, you are trapped in a confined space with people you can no longer stand. With no ability to leave, no ability to get distance, no ability to bring in new social connections, the research on this is unambiguous. A 2018 review published in the journal Acta Astronautica examined psychological risks for long-duration space missions and concluded that crew cohesion breakdown represents one of the most serious threats to mission success. The paper cited historical precedents from Antarctic overwinter stations where crew conflicts became so severe that people refused to speak to each other for months, where physical altercations occurred, where individuals had to be evacuated for psychiatric reasons. And these were at stations with regular resupply flights and the possibility of emergency evacuation. On Mars, there is no evacuation. I want you to sit with this for a moment. Close your eyes if you can and really imagine it. You are on Mars. You have been there for 2 years. The initial excitement has long since faded. Every day is the same routine. The same red landscape outside your window, the same recycled air, the same 6 faces. You have not hugged your parents in over 2 years. You have not felt rain on your skin. You have not heard birds singing. You have not walked in a forest. You have not felt the sun on your face without the barrier of a helmet. You have not eaten fresh food that was not grown in a hydroponic chamber. Every single sensory experience that makes human life feel alive and connected and meaningful has been stripped away. And it will never come back. Not next year. Not in 5 years. Never. This is your life now. This is the reality of Mars colonization that no promotional video from SpaceX will ever show you. Now let us talk about something that the Mars colonization advocates love to discuss but consistently misrepresent. Terraforming. The idea that we could transform Mars into an Earth-like planet with breathable air, liquid water on the surface, and temperatures suitable for human life. This is perhaps the most beautiful and most dishonest part of the entire Mars dream. The current Martian atmosphere is approximately 95% carbon dioxide, with traces of nitrogen, argon, and other gases. The atmospheric pressure at the surface is about 600 pascals, which is less than 1% of Earth's sea level pressure. This is so low that liquid water cannot exist on the surface because it immediately boils away due to the low pressure, or freezes due to the low temperatures, which average approximately -60 degrees Celsius. To make Mars habitable without spacesuits, you would need to accomplish several things simultaneously. You would need to increase the atmospheric pressure by at least a factor of 100. You would need to raise the global temperature by approximately 60 degrees. You would need to introduce enough oxygen for humans to breathe. And you would need to create a water cycle with liquid surface water. The most commonly proposed method for beginning terraforming is to release carbon dioxide from the Martian polar ice caps and from carbonate minerals in the regolith. The idea is that additional CO2 would create a greenhouse effect, warming the planet, which would release more CO2, creating a positive feedback loop. In 2018, a landmark paper was published in the journal Nature Astronomy by Bruce Jakosky and Christopher Edwards, two of the leading researchers in Martian atmospheric science. They conducted a comprehensive inventory of all known CO2 reserves on Mars, including the polar ice caps, absorbed CO2 in the regolith, and CO2 locked in carbonate minerals. Their conclusion was devastating to the terraforming dream. Even if all accessible CO2 reserves on Mars were released, the resulting atmospheric pressure would be at most 7% of Earth's. That is nowhere near enough for liquid water or warmth. The CO2 simply does not exist in sufficient quantities on Mars. The planet lost most of its atmosphere billions of years ago to solar wind erosion, and that gas is gone forever, dispersed into interplanetary space. What about importing gases from elsewhere? You could theoretically redirect ammonia-rich asteroids or comets to impact Mars, releasing greenhouse gases. The scale required is almost incomprehensible. You would need to deliver approximately 10 to the power of 16 kilograms of gas to Mars. That is 10,000 trillion kilograms. For comparison, the total mass of all human-made objects ever launched into space in all of history is approximately 14,000 kilograms per year currently reaching orbit. The numbers are not even in the same universe. What about using super greenhouse gases like perfluorocarbons, which are thousands of times more potent than CO2 at trapping heat? A 2001 study explored this option and found that while theoretically possible, you would need to produce these gases at industrial scales for centuries or millennia, and Mars would need its own industrial infrastructure to do so. We are talking about building thousands of chemical factories on Mars to produce gases for hundreds of years before the planet even begins to warm noticeably. And even if, through some magical technological breakthrough, you could warm Mars and thicken its atmosphere, you still face the magnetosphere problem. Without a global magnetic field, the solar wind would continue to strip away any atmosphere you added. The stripping rate is slow by human standards, millions of years to erode a significant fraction, so it would not undo your work within a human lifetime. But it means terraforming is not a one-time project. It is a permanent, ongoing engineering commitment that must be maintained forever. The most optimistic scientific estimates for terraforming Mars, even with technologies far beyond our current capabilities, suggest timeframes of 100,000 to 1 million years. That is not a typo. 100,000 years at minimum. For context, 100,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had not yet left Africa. The entirety of human civilization, from the first cities to the internet, spans only about 12,000 years. We are talking about a project that would take 10 times longer than all of recorded human history. So when Elon Musk talks about making Mars habitable, when the headlines proclaim terraforming timelines of a few hundred years, understand that this is not consistent with our best understanding of planetary science. It is marketing. It is vision casting. It is the beautiful lie. Let us shift our focus now to something more immediate and practical. the engineering challenges of simply keeping humans alive on Mars, not terraforming, not making it a paradise, just keeping a small group of people from dying, because even this, which should be the easy part compared to terraforming, presents challenges that current technology cannot reliably solve. First, let us talk about life support. On Earth, we take for granted that the atmosphere provides unlimited oxygen, that rain provides water, that the biosphere recycles our waste, that the environment maintains temperature within livable ranges. On Mars, every single one of these functions must be performed artificially, continuously, without fail. A life support system for a Mars colony would need to produce oxygen from CO2, either through electrolysis of water or through the MOXIE process, which splits carbon dioxide into oxygen and carbon monoxide. NASA's MOXIE experiment on the Perseverance rover demonstrated this process in April 2021, producing approximately 6 grams of oxygen per hour. A single human being requires approximately 840 grams of oxygen per day. You would need 140 MOXIE equivalent devices running continuously just to support one person. For a colony of 100 people, you would need 14,000 such devices, all operating without failure. Water recycling is another critical system. The International Space Station recycles approximately 90% of water, including from humidity in the air and from urine. But 90% is not 100%. There are always losses. On the ISS, these losses are compensated by regular resupply from Earth. On Mars, there is no regular resupply. Every drop of water that is lost must be replaced either from ice mining operations on Mars or from extremely rare and expensive shipments from Earth. A 2020 study in the journal Life Sciences in Space Research calculated that even with 98% water recycling efficiency, a colony of 100 people would need to extract approximately 4,000 litres of new water from the Martian environment per year just to compensate for system losses. Now, water ice does exist on Mars. We know this from orbital observations and from the Phoenix lander, which directly observed water ice just below the surface at high latitudes in 2008. But extracting this ice, melting it, purifying it, and integrating it into the colony's water system is a significant engineering challenge. The ice exists primarily at high latitudes where temperatures are extremely cold and solar energy for power generation is limited. At the equatorial latitudes where temperatures are somewhat more moderate and solar energy is more abundant, water ice exists only deep underground, if it exists at all. Food production presents perhaps the most daunting agricultural challenge ever conceived. Growing food on Mars means growing it entirely indoors, under artificial lighting or carefully filtered sunlight, in soil that is not really soil at all. Martian regolith contains toxic perchlorates at concentrations that would kill most plants and poison any human who consumed produce grown in untreated regolith. A study published in the journal Icarus in 2017 confirmed that perchlorate concentrations in Martian soil are high enough to be toxic to both plants and humans. The regolith would need extensive chemical treatment before any food could be grown in it. Alternatively, hydroponic or aeroponic systems could be used, but these require enormous infrastructure, precise chemical inputs, and absolutely reliable technology. Any failure in the food production system is not an inconvenience, it is a death sentence, because the next resupply ship from Earth is months or years away. A 2019 analysis by researchers at the University of Central Florida estimated the requirements for a self-sufficient Mars colony food system. For a community of 100 people, you would need approximately 150,000 square meters of growing space, an area equivalent to approximately 20 full-sized football fields. This growing space would need artificial lighting consuming approximately 100 megawatts of continuous power. For comparison, The International Space Station's total power generation capacity is approximately 90 kilowatts. You would need more than 1,000 times the ISS's power just for food lighting. Where does this power come from? Solar panels on Mars receive only about 43% of the solar energy compared to Earth due to Mars's greater distance from the Sun. Dust storms can reduce solar input by 99% for weeks at a time. The global dust storm of 2018 completely obscured the Sun across the entire planet for over a month, effectively killing the Opportunity rover by depriving it of solar power. A colony dependent on solar power would need enormous battery reserves to survive dust storms, or it would need nuclear power. Nuclear fission reactors are indeed the most promising power source for a Mars colony, but they bring their own challenges: fuel supply, maintenance, waste disposal, and the simple fact that no nuclear reactor has ever been operated on another planet. NASA has been developing the kilopower reactor, a small fission system designed for space applications. As of the most recent test, designated Krusty, conducted in 2018, a single unit produced approximately 1 kilowatt of electrical power. To power a colony of 100 people with even minimal industrial and agricultural capability, you would need approximately 10 to 50 megawatts, that is 10,000 to 50,000 kilopower units, or a much larger reactor that has never been built or tested in any environment, let alone on Mars. Every system I have described so far, oxygen generation, water recycling, food production, power generation, must work perfectly, continuously, for years, without significant maintenance from Earth. Any single system failure could be fatal. And all these systems are interconnected. Power failure means no oxygen production, no water recycling, no food lighting, no heating. Within hours, the colony begins to die. Redundancy helps, but redundancy means more mass, more complexity, more things that can potentially fail, more spare parts that must be manufactured locally or shipped from Earth. On Earth, we benefit from what engineers call graceful degradation. If your air conditioning breaks, you open a window. If your water supply is contaminated, you buy bottled water. If your electricity goes out, you bundle up in blankets and wait. On Mars, there are no windows to open. There is no bottled water. There are no blankets warm enough to survive without heating. Every technological failure is potentially lethal, and the margin between survival and death is paper thin. Let us now examine the economics of Mars colonization, because numbers do not lie, and the numbers tell a story that no amount of visionary rhetoric can overcome. As of current technology, it costs approximately $2,720 per kilogram to launch payload into low Earth orbit using SpaceX's Falcon Heavy rocket. Getting that payload from low Earth orbit to the surface of Mars requires additional propulsion, navigation, entry, descent, and landing systems that multiply the cost by approximately 10 to 20 times. Conservative estimates place the cost of delivering 1 kilogram of useful payload to the Martian surface at approximately $100,000 to $1 million per kilogram, depending on the mission architecture. Let us use a conservative middle estimate of $500,000 per kilogram. A human being needs, at absolute minimum, approximately 3,000 to 5,000 kilograms of equipment, habitat, food, water and supplies to survive for 1 year on Mars. This does not include the mass of the spacecraft itself, the propulsion systems, or the landing hardware, just the survival supplies. At $500,000 per kilogram, keeping one person alive on Mars for 1 year costs between $1.5 and $2.5 billion. For a colony of 100 people, that is $150 to $250 billion per year in resupply costs alone, not including the initial construction. not including the technology development, not including the rockets themselves. SpaceX's proposed Starship system aims to dramatically reduce these costs. Elon Musk has claimed a target of $200 per kilogram to low Earth orbit, and has suggested that eventually it might cost $100,000 per person to travel to Mars. These numbers have been widely repeated in media. They have not been independently verified. They are not supported by any peer-reviewed analysis. They assume full reusability with thousands of flights, rapid turnaround times, and manufacturing scales that do not currently exist. The most optimistic independent analyses suggest that Starship might achieve costs of approximately $1,000 per kilogram to low Earth orbit, which would still translate to tens of thousands of dollars per kilogram to the Martian surface. Better than today, but still economically prohibitive for anything resembling a colony. And here is the fundamental economic question that no one has adequately answered. Who pays? Government funding for space exploration represents a tiny fraction of national budgets. NASA's entire annual budget is approximately $25 billion, which is enough to barely maintain current programs. A Mars colony would require hundreds of billions, possibly trillions, of sustained investment over decades. No single government has shown willingness to commit such resources to space. What about private investment? Investment requires return. What economic activity on Mars generates revenue that justifies trillion-dollar investments? There is no obvious answer. Mars has no known resources that are economically viable to return to Earth given transport costs. You cannot mine gold on Mars and ship it home profitably when shipping costs are $500,000 per kilogram. Tourism? For whom? At what price point? For how many customers? Intellectual property? Perhaps, but research can be conducted far more cheaply with robotic missions. The brutal economic reality is that Mars colonization requires someone to spend an extraordinary amount of money with no clear mechanism for financial return. Governments might do this for prestige, as they did with Apollo. But Apollo cost approximately $200 billion in today's money and lasted only 3 years. Mars colonization would cost orders of magnitude more and must be sustained indefinitely. No nation has ever committed to such a project. The political will does not exist, and there is no obvious reason why it would emerge. Some advocates point to historical colonization of the Americas as an analogy. European nations spent enormous resources establishing colonies in the New World, but this analogy fails completely under examination. The Americas had breathable air, drinkable water, fertile soil, timber, fish, fur, gold, silver, and eventually agricultural exports that generated enormous economic returns. Colonists could live off the land from day one. They did not need sealed habitats, or oxygen generation systems, or radiation shielding. The Americas were, despite their challenges, fundamentally habitable for human beings. Mars is not. Mars is a frozen, irradiated, airless desert with toxic soil. There is no living off the land. There is only dying off the land unless you bring everything you need with you at extraordinary expense. Let me now take you into a dimension of this topic that is rarely discussed but profoundly important. The ethical dimension. Because Mars colonization, if it were ever attempted, would raise ethical questions that we are completely unprepared to answer. Consider the first generation of children born on Mars. They did not choose to be there. Their parents chose for them. These children will grow up in a confined artificial environment. They will never experience nature as we know it. They will never swim in an ocean, climb a mountain, walk through a forest, or feel wind on their faces. They will grow up knowing that they may be physically unable to ever visit Earth due to their reduced bone density and muscle mass. They will be, in effect, prisoners of a decision their parents made. Is it ethical to create human beings in conditions of such constraint? Is it ethical to bring children into existence knowing they will be physiologically trapped on a planet that is trying to kill them every moment of every day? The question of governance also presents enormous ethical challenges. Who governs a Mars colony? The company that pays for it? The government that sponsors it? The colonists themselves? If a corporation like SpaceX establishes and funds the colony, do the colonists essentially become corporate subjects? What labour rights exist? What happens if colonists want to return to Earth but the corporation refuses to pay for their transport? What happens if the corporation goes bankrupt and stops sending supplies? These are not hypothetical concerns. They are structural features of any privately funded colonization effort. History shows us what happens when powerful entities establish colonies with total control over their inhabitants. It is not a pleasant history. And what about the scientific ethics of contaminating Mars with terrestrial biology? If there is, or ever was, life on Mars, introducing Earth organisms could destroy it before we ever discover it. This is not a minor concern. The search for extraterrestrial life is arguably the most important scientific question of our era. Sending humans to Mars with their trillions of associated microorganisms, their waste products, their agricultural systems full of Earth bacteria and fungi would contaminate the planet irreversibly. We would potentially destroy the very thing that makes Mars scientifically interesting in our rush to claim it as real estate. A 2019 paper in the journal Astrobiology argued that we have a moral obligation to fully explore Mars robotically and resolve the question of Martian life before sending humans. The authors argued that contaminating Mars before we understand it would be an irreversible loss for science and for all of humanity. Once you introduce Earth microorganisms to Mars, you can never undo it. You can never again be certain whether any biological discovery on Mars represents native Martian life or contamination from Earth. Now I want to address something that often comes up in discussions of Mars colonization: the backup planet argument. The idea that we need to become a multi-planetary species to survive existential risks like asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, or nuclear war. This is perhaps the most emotionally compelling argument for Mars colonization, and it deserves careful examination. First, let us consider asteroid impacts. The last major extinction-level asteroid impact was 66 million years ago. The probability of such an impact in any given century is approximately 1 in 100 million. We are also rapidly developing the capability to detect and deflect threatening asteroids. NASA's DART mission in September 2022 successfully demonstrated that we can alter an asteroid's orbit through kinetic impact. For a fraction of the cost of Mars colonization, we could build a robust planetary defense system that eliminates this risk entirely. Spending trillions to colonize Mars as insurance against asteroids is like spending your entire life savings on a second house in case of earthquakes, when you could simply reinforce your current house for 1,000th of the cost. What about supervolcanic eruptions? The last supereruption was approximately 26,000 years ago at Lake Taupo in New Zealand. These events are devastating but not extinction level for our species. Humans survived the Toba supereruption approximately 74,000 years ago, likely with a population bottleneck but not extinction. And again, investing in understanding and potentially mitigating volcanic risks on Earth is vastly more cost-effective than building a backup civilization on Mars. What about nuclear war? This is perhaps the strongest argument for a backup planet. But consider, a Mars colony capable of self-sufficiency would require decades of construction and a population of at least 10,000 people with diverse technical skills and complete industrial capability. During those decades of construction, the colony would be entirely dependent on Earth. If nuclear war destroyed civilization on Earth before the colony achieved self-sufficiency, the colony would die too, just more slowly. And once a colony did achieve self-sufficiency, it would have done so by developing complete industrial, agricultural, and technological independence, meaning that the same resources and knowledge could have been used to build robust, self-sufficient communities on Earth that could survive nuclear war. Underground bunkers, sealed ecosystems, dispersed populations. All of these are vastly cheaper and more achievable than Mars' self-sufficiency. The uncomfortable truth is that there is no plausible near-term existential risk to Earth that is better addressed by Mars colonization than by direct investment in Earth-based resilience. The backup planet argument sounds compelling in TED Talks, but it collapses under quantitative analysis. Here is another aspect that fascinates me and that I think deserves more attention: the cultural and social dimension. Mars colonization advocates often envision a fresh start for humanity, a chance to build a better society free from the constraints and corruptions of Earth. This is a beautiful vision. It is also historically naive. Every historical attempt to create a utopian community has failed. The Pilgrims sought religious freedom in the New World and immediately established their own form of religious authoritarianism. The French Revolution sought liberty, equality, and fraternity and produced the Terror. Communist revolutions sought workers' paradises and produced totalitarian states. The pattern is consistent across cultures and centuries. Humans carry their social dysfunctions with them. Changing your physical environment does not change human nature. The same drives for power, status, in-group preference, tribal conflict, and dominance that create problems on Earth would manifest on Mars, likely amplified by the extreme stress of the environment. A small, isolated community under extreme stress is not a recipe for utopia. It is a recipe for authoritarianism. When survival is at stake daily, when every decision carries life or death consequences, democratic deliberation becomes a luxury. The historical analogy that Mars colonization most closely resembles is not the settlement of the Americas. It is a submarine. And submarines are not democracies. They are strict hierarchies with absolute authority vested in the commander. This is not because submarine designers are authoritarian. It is because in extreme environments where a single mistake can kill everyone, collective decision-making is too slow and too prone to error. A Mars colony would almost inevitably develop into an authoritarian structure, regardless of the intentions of its founders. The environment demands it. When the alternative to obedience is death, freedom becomes theoretical. Let us now explore what I consider to be the most psychologically interesting aspect of the Mars colonization narrative. Why do we believe it? Why does this beautiful lie have such power over our imaginations? Why do millions of people find inspiration in the idea of colonizing a planet that is actively hostile to their existence? I think the answer lies in a deep feature of human psychology. We are a species that evolved by moving. Our ancestors left Africa and populated every continent on Earth. Movement, exploration, expansion, these are coded into our deepest cultural narratives. The frontier myth, the idea that there is always somewhere new to go, somewhere better over the next horizon, is perhaps the most powerful story in human culture. And right now, for the first time in our species' history, we have run out of frontier on Earth. Every continent is explored. Every ocean is mapped. Every mountain is climbed. The entire planet is photographed from satellite. There is nowhere left to go. This creates a deep psychological discomfort in a species wired for exploration. Mars offers relief from this discomfort. It promises that the frontier still exists, that the age of exploration is not over, that there are still new worlds to conquer. And this promise is so emotionally satisfying that we accept it without adequate scrutiny of whether it is actually achievable. To Elon Musk, whatever his other qualities, is a master storyteller. He understands this psychological need at an intuitive level. When he talks about making humanity multiplanetary, he is not primarily selling rockets or tickets to Mars. He is selling meaning. He is selling the narrative that we are an expanding, progressing, destiny-fulfilling species rather than a trapped, limited, declining one. And that narrative is worth more to people than any amount of scientific evidence about radiation or bone loss or psychological breakdown. This is why Mars colonization persists as a dream despite overwhelming scientific evidence of its impracticality. It is not a scientific proposition, it is a mythological one. It serves the same psychological function as heaven or paradise or the promised land. It gives people something to hope for, something to believe in, something that makes the mundane difficulties of present existence feel meaningful, because they are part of a larger story of cosmic destiny. I want to be clear, I am not mocking this psychological need. It is real, and it is important. Humans need narratives of progress and possibility. We need to feel that the future holds something magnificent. But there is a difference between a useful aspiration and a harmful delusion. An aspiration motivates real progress toward achievable goals. A delusion diverts resources and attention from problems that actually need solving. And this brings us to perhaps the most important question of all. What are we not doing because we are dreaming of Mars? While billions of dollars flow toward Mars-related research and development, Earth faces existential challenges that receive a fraction of that attention and funding. Climate change is altering our planet faster than our institutions can adapt. Biodiversity loss is accelerating toward a mass extinction. Ocean acidification threatens marine food chains. Topsoil erosion threatens agricultural productivity. Freshwater scarcity affects billions of people. Antibiotic resistance threatens to return us to a pre-antibiotic era of medicine. Each of these problems is solvable with sufficient resources and political will. Each of them directly threatens billions of lives, and each of them would benefit enormously from even a fraction of the money, engineering talent, and political attention currently devoted to the dream of Mars. There is a profound irony in the idea that we should colonize Mars as a backup for Earth, while simultaneously failing to protect Earth from threats we ourselves are creating. It is like a person setting fire to their own house while simultaneously searching for a new house to buy in case of fire. The logical response is to stop setting fire to your house, not to go house shopping. Now, I can already hear the counter-argument. It is not an either-or choice. We can do both. We can protect Earth and pursue Mars simultaneously. And in theory, yes. But in practice, resources are finite. Political attention is finite. Engineering talent is finite. And the Mars dream, by positioning itself as humanity's ultimate destiny, actively undermines the urgency of Earth-based problems. If Mars is our backup, then saving Earth becomes less urgent. If we can always escape to a new planet, then why invest so heavily in protecting this one? The psychological effect of the Mars narrative is to reduce the perceived stakes of environmental destruction on Earth, and this may be its most dangerous consequence. Let me share with you now some research that I find particularly illuminating. In 2020, a team of researchers from the University of Edinburgh published a paper in the journal Global Environmental Change, examining public attitudes towards space colonization and environmental protection. They found a statistically significant inverse correlation. People who expressed strong support for space colonization as a response to existential risk were less likely to support immediate action on climate change and other environmental threats. The researchers suggested that the space colonization narrative provides what they called a psychological escape valve, reducing the emotional pressure to address earthly problems by offering an alternative solution that requires no immediate personal sacrifice. This is the beautiful lie at its most insidious. It does not just divert resources, it diverts concern. It tells us we do not need to change our behaviour, do not need to make difficult choices, do not need to sacrifice convenience. Because technology will eventually let us start fresh somewhere else. and so we continue degrading the only confirmed habitable planet in the known universe, comforted by the fantasy that we can always leave. I want to turn now to an alternative vision of space exploration that I believe is far more scientifically grounded, far more achievable, and far more beneficial than Mars colonization. Because being skeptical of Mars colonization does not mean being skeptical of space. Space is real, space is magnificent, and there are things we can and should do in space, but they are not the things Mars advocates typically promote. First, robotic exploration of Mars is extraordinarily valuable and should continue and expand. Our robotic missions to Mars have produced remarkable science at a fraction of the cost and risk of human missions. Curiosity and perseverance have taught us more about Mars in their years of operation than any human mission could in a similar time frame, because they never get tired, never get depressed, never conflict with crewmates, never need food or water or oxygen, and never need a ride home. The science case for robotic Mars exploration is overwhelming. The science case for sending humans to Mars is, by comparison, remarkably weak. Almost everything humans can do on Mars that robots cannot, such as improvising in response to unexpected findings or conducting complex field geology, could be achieved through improvements in robotic capability that would cost a fraction of a human mission. Second, the Moon deserves far more attention than it currently receives. The Moon is 3 days from Earth, not 7 months. It has water ice in permanently shadowed craters at its poles. It has helium-3 in its regolith, which may eventually be valuable for fusion energy. It offers a location to test habitat construction, life support systems, and in situ resource utilization in an environment where rescue is feasible and communication is nearly instantaneous. If we cannot sustain a permanent human presence on the Moon, which is vastly easier than Mars, we have no business attempting Mars. The Moon is the logical proving ground, and the fact that we skipped it in favour of Mars hype is a testament to the power of narrative over reason. Third, orbital habitats represent a path to space settlement that solves almost every problem Mars colonization creates. In 1974, physicist Gerard O'Neill proposed large rotating space habitats, now called O'Neill cylinders, that would use centripetal force to simulate gravity. These habitats could be built in space using materials from asteroids and the Moon. They could be located anywhere in the solar system. They could provide full Earth gravity through rotation. They could be shielded against radiation. They could be maintained and expanded incrementally. They could house millions of people in Earth-like environments, complete with weather, landscapes, and the illusion of open sky. And they could be connected to each other and to Earth through regular transportation. O'Neill cylinders are not without their own engineering challenges. They are enormously expensive and require manufacturing capability in space that does not yet exist. But they solve the problems that make Mars colonization fundamentally unworkable. Gravity can be set to exactly Earth normal. Radiation can be shielded against with sufficient mass. Temperature and atmosphere can be precisely controlled. The habitat can be maintained and expanded without terraforming an entire planet. And because they are in space rather than at the bottom of a gravity well, transportation to and from them is relatively efficient. I am not claiming that O'Neill cylinders are easy or imminent, but they address the physics in a way that Mars colonization does not. They work with physics rather than against it. Mars colonization requires you to fight the planet's environment every moment of every day forever. Orbital habitats allow you to create whatever environment you want from the beginning. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, protecting and restoring Earth's biosphere is the single most important space project we can undertake. Earth is, as far as we know, the only planet in the entire observable universe that supports complex life. It has taken 4 billion years of evolution to create the biosphere we inhabit. This biosphere is not just our home, it is us. We are literally made of it. Our bodies are constructed from its atoms, nourished by its food webs, evolved in its ecosystems, adapted to its specific conditions. When we talk about colonizing Mars to save humanity, we are implicitly reducing humanity to its genetics, to the mere biological continuation of Homo sapiens DNA. But humanity is far more than DNA. Humanity is culture, art, music, philosophy, history, tradition, landscape, memory, connection to place and to the living world. All of that exists only on Earth. None of it transfers to Mars. 1 million humans surviving in underground tunnels on Mars, breathing recycled air, eating hydroponic lettuce, never seeing a tree or hearing a bird or feeling rain. Is that really saving humanity? Or is that just saving human-shaped organisms while everything that makes humanity meaningful is lost? I want to introduce here a concept from psychology that I think is critically important to understanding the Mars colonization narrative. It is called solution aversion. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology in 2014 by Troy Campbell and Aaron Kay found that when people are ideologically opposed to the solutions for a problem, they are motivated to deny that the problem exists. The reverse also operates. When people find a proposed solution emotionally appealing, they are motivated to exaggerate the problem it addresses. Mars colonization is an emotionally appealing solution. It promises adventure, expansion, technological progress, cosmic destiny. All of these are things that many people find deeply satisfying. And because the solution is appealing, there is a motivated tendency to exaggerate the problems it addresses. Existential risk to Earth becomes amplified. The fragility of our single-planet existence becomes emphasized. The inability to solve Earth's problems becomes assumed rather than examined. The Mars narrative prospers not because the problem is unsolvable on Earth, but because solving it on Earth requires changes that are emotionally and ideologically difficult, while solving it through Mars colonization requires only technological optimism and patience, both of which are emotionally easy. This is the beautiful lies mechanism of action. It replaces difficult solutions with appealing fantasies. It says, you do not need to change your consumption patterns, reduce your carbon footprint, challenge economic structures, or make personal sacrifices. You just need to wait for rockets to get bigger. And waiting is easy. Let me now address the timeline claims made by Mars colonization advocates, because these are among the most dishonest aspects of the entire narrative. Elon Musk has repeatedly stated that SpaceX will land humans on Mars by various dates. In 2016, he said 2024. That date has passed with no humans on Mars. He then suggested 2026. As of my knowledge, no crewed Mars mission is anywhere close to launch readiness. The pattern of perpetually receding timelines is not unique to Musk. It has characterized Mars colonization advocacy since the 1950s. Wernher von Braun predicted Mars missions by the 1980s. NASA's 1989 Space Exploration Initiative proposed Mars landings by 2010. The 2004 Vision for Space Exploration proposed Mars missions by the 2020s. None of these timelines have been met. Each was replaced by a new timeline equally divorced from engineering reality. This pattern has a name in project management, the planning fallacy. First described by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in 1979, the planning fallacy is the systematic tendency to underestimate the time, cost and complexity of future projects while overestimating their benefits. It is amplified by optimism bias and by the incentive structures of advocacy, where attention and funding flow to those who promise the most dramatic results in the shortest time. The honest timeline for even a small, non-self-sufficient human outpost on Mars, based on the current rate of technological development and the unresolved challenges I have described, is likely several decades for first landing and many additional decades for any sustained presence. A self-sustaining colony, one that could survive the loss of contact with Earth, is likely a century or more away if it is achievable at all. And a terraformed Mars with a breathable atmosphere is hundreds of thousands of years away by any physically realistic estimate. Now I want to talk about something that gets to the heart of the scientific methodology we should apply to this question: the concept of burden of proof. In science, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The claim that humans can colonize Mars is an extraordinary claim. It proposes something that has never been done, but contradicts much of what we know about human biology and psychology, that requires technologies that do not yet exist and that would cost more than any project in human history. The burden of proof should be on those making this claim. They should need to demonstrate, through rigorous evidence and testing, that each challenge can be overcome. Instead, what we see is the opposite. Advocates assert that colonization is possible, and skeptics are asked to prove it impossible. This is a logical inversion. You cannot prove a negative. I cannot prove it is impossible to colonize Mars, just as I cannot prove it is impossible to build a perpetual motion machine. What I can do is point to the enormous body of evidence that suggests it is extraordinarily difficult, possibly beyond our capabilities for the foreseeable future, and certainly far more difficult and far further in the future than advocates claim. The proper scientific approach would be incremental. First, demonstrate long-term human health in partial gravity through a rotating space station. Second, establish a permanent lunar base and demonstrate sustained human presence with local resource utilization. Third, develop and test radiation shielding adequate for deep space transit. Fourth, develop and test closed-loop life support systems reliable enough for multi-year operation without resupply. Fifth, develop economic models that can sustain the enormous ongoing costs. Sixth, resolve the ethical questions about governance and reproduction. Only after all of these prerequisites are met should we seriously contemplate Mars colonization, and by my assessment, we have not yet fully achieved even the first of these steps. Let me share something else with you that I find deeply revealing about the current state of Mars colonization planning. In 2020, NASA published its Moon-to-Mars architecture concept, laying out the agency's approach to eventual Mars missions. The document is remarkable for what it does not contain. It does not contain a specific timeline for Mars landing. It does not contain a solution to the radiation problem. It does not contain a solution to the long-term health effects of reduced gravity. It does not contain a closed-loop life support system design validated for multi-year operation. What it does contain is a series of technology development goals with undefined timelines and aspirational language about capability-driven approaches. Even NASA, the organization best positioned to achieve Mars missions, does not claim to have solutions to the fundamental challenges. They are still in the research phase for most of them. Compare this to the confidence with which private companies and media outlets discuss Mars colonization. SpaceX talks about cities on Mars. Mars One, before its bankruptcy in 2019, sold one-way tickets to people. News articles routinely present Mars colonization as a near-term certainty rather than a distant possibility. The gap between institutional scientific caution and public narrative confidence is enormous. And this gap is itself harmful because it creates expectations that cannot be met, generates investment based on unrealistic timelines, and diverts attention from more achievable and more beneficial space activities. Let us talk about Mars One for a moment, because it perfectly illustrates the dangers of the beautiful lie when it is taken to its extreme. Mars One was founded in 2012 by Bas Lansdorp, who proposed sending humans to Mars on a one-way trip funded by reality television. Over 200,000 people initially expressed interest in becoming permanent Mars settlers. The project was widely covered in mainstream media, often credulously. Volunteers were interviewed on talk shows, books were written, documentaries were filmed. And then, in 2014, a detailed technical analysis by researchers at MIT found that the Mars One plan was fatally flawed. Their crops would overproduce oxygen, requiring venting. The technology to extract nitrogen from the Martian atmosphere did not exist. The HAB modules were too small by a factor of several. The plan had no contingency for equipment failure. The cost estimates were off by at least 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. Mars One never acknowledged these problems adequately. It continued to promote itself, continued to collect application fees from hopeful settlers, continued to produce media content. In January 2019, the company was declared bankrupt by a Swiss court. It had raised approximately $1 million, a pittance compared to what even a preliminary design study would cost, let alone an actual mission. 200,000 people had volunteered to die on a project that was, from the beginning, technically and financially impossible. This is what the beautiful lie does at its worst. It exploits people's deepest psychological needs, their desire for meaning, adventure, purpose, transcendence, and converts those needs into attention and money for people who have no realistic plan to deliver what they promise. I want to be balanced here. Not everyone who promotes Mars colonization is dishonest. Many scientists and engineers working on Mars-related technologies are doing genuine, valuable work. Understanding how to grow food in controlled environments is useful on Earth. Developing better radiation shielding protects astronauts in Earth orbit. Creating more efficient life support systems benefits submarine crews and potentially disaster relief. Building better rockets has commercial applications far beyond Mars. The technology development motivated by the Mars dream has genuine spillover benefits. But these benefits would exist even without the specific goal of colonization. We do not need to pretend colonization is imminent to justify investment in space technology. We can pursue the genuine benefits of space research and development while being honest about the timeline and feasibility of human settlement on Mars. Let us now go deeper into the quantum and fundamental physics that underlies some of these challenges, because I think understanding the physics helps clarify why certain problems are so difficult to solve. Radiation damage to DNAR operates at the quantum level. When a high-energy particle from a galactic cosmic ray passes through a cell, it ionizes atoms along its path. This ionization breaks chemical bonds, including the bonds that hold DNAR together. A single cosmic ray particle can cause what is called a double strand break, where both strands of the DNAR double helix are severed at the same location. Double strand breaks are the most dangerous form of DNAR damage because they are difficult for cellular repair mechanisms to fix correctly. Often the repair process introduces errors, deletions, insertions, translocations of genetic material. These errors accumulate over time and can eventually trigger uncontrolled cell growth, which we call cancer. The quantum nature of this process is important because it means there is no minimum safe dose of galactic cosmic ray radiation. Each individual particle has a probability of causing a double strand break. Each double strand break has a probability of being misrepaired. Each misrepair has a probability of contributing to cancer development. There is no threshold below which this process stops occurring. It is purely probabilistic, and the probability accumulates with dose. This is why shielding against galactic cosmic rays is so difficult. You need to either stop the particles completely, which requires enormous mass, or accept that some particles will get through and cause damage. There is no clever engineering trick that makes the physics disappear. The heavy ions in galactic cosmic rays, elements like iron, silicon, and carbon travelling at relativistic speeds, are particularly devastating to biological tissue. These particles are called Z particles, standing for high atomic number and energy. When an Z particle hits shielding material, the nuclear fragmentation I described earlier occurs. The original particle shatters atomic nuclei in the shielding producing a spray of lighter particles. While individually less damaging than the original Z particle, these secondary particles are more numerous and can penetrate further into the habitat. Studies using particle accelerators to simulate space radiation exposure have shown that Z particles cause unique patterns of NAR damage that are qualitatively different from X-ray or gamma-ray damage. They create what are called clustered lesions, multiple DINA damage sites in close proximity that overwhelm cellular repair mechanisms. A 2016 study published in Nature Scientific Reports demonstrated that simulated galactic cosmic ray exposure causes persistent oxidative stress in mouse tissues, lasting months after exposure ends. This means the damage from space radiation is not just from the direct hits. It creates a sustained inflammatory environment in tissues that continues causing secondary damage long after the radiation event itself. This physics has implications that go beyond cancer. A remarkable series of studies from the University of California, Irvine, published between 2015 and 2020, demonstrated that Z particle irradiation causes significant cognitive impairment in mice. The irradiated mice showed decreased performance on novel object recognition tests, impaired spatial memory, increased anxiety-like behavior, and reduced social interaction. The researchers found that radiation caused dendritic spine loss in neurons, essentially pruning the connections between brain cells. This was not a temporary effect. It persisted for months, suggesting permanent structural changes to the brain. These findings raise the alarming possibility that long-term exposure to galactic cosmic rays on Mars would cause progressive cognitive decline in colonists. Their ability to think clearly, solve problems, remember information, and regulate emotions could deteriorate over years of exposure. And this deterioration would occur precisely when their survival depends on maintaining peak cognitive performance to manage the complex systems keeping them alive. Now let me connect this to the broader thermodynamic reality of what we are attempting with Mars colonization. In physics, there is a concept called the second law of thermodynamics. It states that in any isolated system, entropy, which we can loosely define as disorder, always increases over time. Maintaining order, maintaining complex structures and processes, requires constant input of energy. Your body maintains its incredible molecular order by consuming food energy. A city maintains its order through constant energy input from power grids. An ecosystem maintains its order through constant energy input from the sun. A Mars colony is, in thermodynamic terms, an extraordinarily low entropy system trying to maintain itself in an extraordinarily high entropy environment. Everything about the Martian environment pushes toward the destruction of order. The radiation damages DNA, pushing biological order toward disorder. The lack of oxygen means chemical energy cannot be extracted from the environment without enormous technological intervention. The cold temperature means thermal energy must be constantly added. The thin atmosphere means pressure vessels must constantly resist the pressure differential, trying to equalize. Every single moment of a Mars colony's existence is a battle against thermodynamic tendency, and this battle requires energy, vast amounts of energy, continuously. On Earth, our biosphere has had 4 billion years to develop self-sustaining energy capture and recycling systems. Plants capture solar energy and convert it to chemical energy. Animals consume that chemical energy and release waste that plants can use. The entire system is self-sustaining because it has evolved incredible efficiency over billions of years of natural selection. A Mars colony has none of this. Every energy conversion, every material cycle, every chemical transformation must be performed by human-built technology that is far less efficient than biological systems and far more prone to failure. This is why self-sufficiency on Mars is such an enormously difficult goal. Self-sufficiency means closing all material and energy loops. It means producing everything you need from local resources using only local energy. On Earth, we achieve this effortlessly because the biosphere does it for us. On Mars, every loop must be closed by technology. And closing every loop means building an industrial civilization from scratch in the most hostile environment imaginable. You need mining, refining, manufacturing, agriculture, energy generation, waste processing, chemical synthesis, metallurgy, electronics fabrication, and dozens of other industrial processes, all operating simultaneously, all feeding into each other, all maintained by a small population of people who must also eat, sleep, and maintain their sanity. Consider what self-sufficiency actually requires. If a single electronic component fails, you need the ability to manufacture a replacement. This means you need semiconductor fabrication capability. Semiconductor fabrication on Earth requires facilities costing billions of dollars, operating in ultra-clean environments, using hundreds of specialized chemicals and gases, drawing on supply chains that span dozens of countries. Replicating even a fraction of this capability on Mars would require an industrial base that itself requires an industrial base to build. The bootstrapping problem is immense. You cannot build a semiconductor factory without electronics. You cannot have electronics without semiconductors. On Earth, we solved this through 200 years of gradual industrial development, each generation building on the previous. On Mars, you would need to compress this into a planned deployment, bringing everything needed for every stage simultaneously. A 2020 analysis published in the journal New Space attempted to estimate the minimum population needed for a self-sustaining Mars colony. The researchers considered the number of specialized roles required to maintain a complete industrial and agricultural civilization. Their estimate, approximately 110 people as an absolute minimum, with significant risk of failure. More realistic estimates suggest several thousand to tens of thousands of people would be needed for true self-sufficiency, and each of those people must be transported to Mars at enormous cost, along with all the equipment for the industrial base they will need. The energy requirements alone are staggering. Modern industrial civilization on Earth uses approximately 18 terawatts of power for 8 billion people, or about 2,200 watts per person. This figure includes the enormous efficiency of shared infrastructure, global supply chains, and natural resources. A Mars colony, lacking all of these, would likely need significantly more power per person. Estimates range from 10,000 to 100,000 watts per person for a colony attempting self-sufficiency. For 1,000 colonists, that is 10 to 100 megawatts. As I mentioned earlier, generating this on Mars with current technology would require either enormous solar arrays that are vulnerable to dust storms or nuclear reactors that have never been tested on another world. I keep coming back to this point because I think it is crucial. The gap between what we have done and what Mars colonization requires is not a gap of degree. It is a gap of kind. We have not just failed to achieve Mars colonization. We have failed to achieve most of the prerequisites for Mars colonization. We have not demonstrated long-term human health in partial gravity. We have not demonstrated closed-loop life support for multi-year durations. We have not demonstrated adequate radiation shielding for deep space. We have not demonstrated food production at scale in extraterrestrial environments. We have not demonstrated in situ resource utilization beyond tiny laboratory demonstrations. We have not demonstrated manufacturing capability anywhere beyond Earth. Each of these prerequisites is itself a multi-decade engineering challenge, and Mars colonization requires all of them simultaneously. This is why I describe Mars colonization as a beautiful lie, not because it is physically impossible in the absolute sense, not because the laws of physics forbid it, but because the timelines and ease with which it is promoted bear no relationship to the actual difficulty of the engineering. the actual state of our knowledge, and the actual resources that would be required. It is possible in the way that building a pyramid was possible for ancient Egyptians, technically achievable with known physics, but requiring resources and time on a scale that transforms the project from engineering into civilization-defining commitment spanning generations. Let us now examine what a realistic Mars program would actually look like if it were pursued honestly. Without hype, without marketing, without billionaire ego. What would science tell us to do? The first step would be to build a variable gravity research station in low Earth orbit. This would be a rotating station that could simulate any gravity level from 0 to 1g. Researchers would study human health at various gravity levels over extended periods. This would answer the fundamental question of whether 38% gravity is adequate for human health. If it is not, Mars colonization faces an insurmountable biological barrier that must be known before committing further resources. This station could be built within a decade using existing rocket technology and station construction experience. It has been proposed multiple times. It has never been funded. Why? Because it would potentially produce inconvenient answers. If Mars gravity is shown to be inadequate for human health, the entire Mars colonization narrative collapses, and with it the funding and attention it generates. The second step would be to establish a permanent lunar base. The Moon is close enough for regular resupply and emergency evacuation. It has a challenging but manageable radiation environment. It has water ice. It has raw materials. It provides a realistic testing ground for every technology needed for Mars, habitats, life support, in situ resource utilization, manufacturing, agriculture, power generation. If we cannot sustain a permanent presence on the Moon, we learn that lesson 3 days from home rather than 7 months from home. If we can sustain it, we gain invaluable experience and confidence for more distant goals. The third step would be to develop and test, on the Moon, closed-loop life support systems capable of operating for years without resupply. This is a critical prerequisite that has never been demonstrated. The longest fully closed-loop test to date was Biosphere 2, which ran for 2 years from September 1991 to September 1993 in Arizona. It partially failed. Oxygen levels dropped dangerously, requiring external supplementation. Food production was insufficient. Insect populations crashed, while ant and cockroach populations exploded. The social dynamics of the 8 crew members deteriorated severely, with the group splitting into 2 hostile factions that did not speak to each other for the final months. Biosphere 2 demonstrated that creating a closed ecosystem is extraordinarily difficult even on Earth. With full gravity, abundant solar energy, immediate emergency access, and the entire resources of modern civilization available for support. The fourth step would be robotic Mars missions, specifically designed to test and demonstrate the technologies needed for human presence. Not just science instruments, but engineering prototypes. A full-scale ISRU plant producing oxygen, water and fuel from Martian resources over multiple years. A nuclear power plant operating in Martian conditions. An agricultural module growing food from treated regolith. A habitat module demonstrating pressure maintenance and thermal control. Each of these should be proven over years of autonomous operation before any human is committed to a Mars surface mission. The fifth step would be initial crewed Mars missions, not for colonization, but for research. Small crews, limited durations, full abort capability, no expectation of permanence. These missions would gather the physiological and psychological data needed to assess whether longer stays are feasible. They would conduct science that robots cannot. They would test systems under human operation. They would be analogous to the Apollo missions, exploratory, not colonial. Only after all 5 of these steps are successfully completed, which represents at minimum several decades of sustained effort, would colonization even enter the realm of reasonable discussion. And by then, our understanding of the challenges and our technological capabilities would likely have evolved in ways we cannot predict today. Perhaps we will have developed genetic engineering capable of making humans radiation resistant. Perhaps we will have discovered that Martian gravity is adequate for health after all. Perhaps we will have developed artificial intelligence sophisticated enough to manage colony systems with minimal human oversight. Or perhaps we will have confirmed that the challenges are insurmountable with any foreseeable technology, and we will direct our efforts toward orbital habitats or toward the even more important project of caring for our home planet. This honest, incremental, science-driven approach is not what Mars colonization advocates promote. It is not exciting enough. It does not sell rockets. It does not generate headlines. It does not satisfy the psychological need for imminent cosmic destiny. But it is how science actually works. It is how engineering actually works. You test before you commit. You learn before you build. You prove feasibility before you spend trillions. The Mars colonization narrative inverts this process. It commits before testing. It builds before learning. It spends before proving. And it does this because the narrative itself, the beautiful lie, is the product being sold. The reality of Mars colonization is secondary to the story of Mars colonization. Let me now discuss something that often gets lost in these conversations: the sheer distance involved. We talk about Mars as if it is a neighbouring country. Media coverage treats it as the next frontier, just over the hill. But the actual distances involved are almost incomprehensible to the human mind. At its closest approach, Mars is approximately 55 million kilometres from Earth. At its furthest, approximately 400 million kilometres. The average distance is approximately 225 million kilometres. Light travels at 300,000 kilometres per second, the fastest speed possible in our universe. And even light takes between 3 and 22 minutes to cross the gap between Earth and Mars. A spacecraft travelling at the speeds achievable with current chemical propulsion takes approximately 7 to 9 months to make the journey. 7 months. Think about what 7 months means for a crew in a spacecraft. 7 months in a tin, canned smaller than a small apartment. No going outside. No fresh air. No new faces. No privacy. No nature. No variety. Just the same small group of people in the same small space, day after day after day, for over 200 days. And at the end of those 7 months, there is no welcoming committee, no comfortable hotel, no reward. There is a freezing, airless desert where everything, including the air you breathe, must be manufactured. The distance also means that any emergency is handled alone. If a medical crisis occurs in transit, there are no hospitals. If equipment fails critically during landing, there is no rescue vehicle. If the habitat develops a leak on the surface, there is no neighbouring city to evacuate to. The crew is entirely self-reliant. For every possible emergency, they must have the tools, the knowledge and the psychological resilience to handle it alone. No training can fully prepare for this. No simulation can replicate the reality of knowing that help is months away at best and may never come at all. The communication delay compounds this isolation. When the Mars Pathfinder rover encountered problems in 1997, engineers on Earth could diagnose and fix issues with only a 20-minute round-trip communication delay. Annoying but manageable for a robot. For humans in a crisis, 20 minutes of silence while you wait for a response to your distress call is an eternity. And that is at closest approach. At maximum distance, the round-trip delay is 44 minutes. You describe your emergency, then wait 44 minutes for a response that was formulated based on information that is now 44 minutes old. In a rapidly evolving crisis, this communication is essentially useless. This is why Mars advocates talk about autonomy and self-reliance. These are presented as virtues, as the pioneering spirit. But they are actually risk factors. Every system that a crew must manage autonomously is a system that can fail without expert support. Every medical procedure that must be performed without real-time guidance is a procedure with higher complication risk. Every psychological crisis that must be managed without professional support is a crisis more likely to escalate. I want to examine now what I consider to be the most honest and scientifically grounded statement ever made by a space agency about Mars colonization. In 2016, the European Space Agency published a report titled Humans in Space: Why We Are Going to Mars. Despite its optimistic title, the report contained a remarkably candid assessment. The challenges of a human mission to Mars are immense, and in some cases currently unresolved. Radiation exposure during transit and on the surface remains above acceptable limits for crew health. The psychological effects of extreme isolation and confinement over mission durations of 2 to 3 years are poorly understood. The biomedical effects of prolonged reduced gravity are unknown. Life support systems capable of operating reliably for the full mission duration have not been demonstrated. This was a space agency whose institutional purpose includes promoting human space exploration, and even they could not claim that the fundamental challenges were solved. They said currently unresolved and poorly understood and unknown and not been demonstrated. These are not minor gaps, these are fundamental prerequisites. And nearly a decade later, they remain largely unresolved, poorly understood, unknown, and undemonstrated. Let us talk about one more aspect of the physical environment on Mars that receives surprisingly little attention: dust. Martian dust is not like Earth dust. It is extraordinarily fine, with particle sizes in the range of 1 to 3 micrometers. It is electrostatically charged by the ultraviolet radiation hitting the surface. It adheres to everything. It penetrates seals. It coats solar panels. It infiltrates machinery. And it is toxic. A study published in GeoHealth in 2017 found that Martian dust simulant, created to match the known properties of Martian soil, is significantly more toxic to human lung cells than terrestrial dust. The combination of its extreme fineness, which allows it to penetrate deep into the lungs, and its chemical composition, which includes reactive perchlorates and iron oxides, makes it a serious health hazard. On the Moon, Apollo astronauts reported irritation from lunar dust within their suits after surface activities. Lunar dust caused respiratory irritation, skin irritation, and equipment damage. Martian dust is finer and more chemically reactive. Any activity on the Martian surface that involves entry and exit through airlocks will inevitably introduce some dust into the habitat. Over months and years, this contamination could accumulate. The dust could damage respiratory systems, corrode equipment, contaminate food-growing systems, and degrade seals. Managing dust contamination in a permanently occupied habitat is a significant engineering challenge that adds yet another system that must function perfectly and continuously for the colony to survive. Global dust storms on Mars represent another serious threat. Approximately every 3 Martian years, which is every 5.5 Earth years, Mars experiences a planet-encircling dust storm that can reduce solar energy input by 99% and last for weeks to months. The 2018 global dust storm persisted for approximately 4 months. During this time, the sky was so obscured that the noontime light level was equivalent to heavy overcast on Earth. Solar panels would produce essentially no power. If a colony relies on solar energy, it would need either massive battery storage or nuclear backup for every major system. 4 months of reduced solar input requires enormous energy reserves. The dust also increases atmospheric opacity, which actually raises surface temperatures slightly through greenhouse warming while cooling the upper atmosphere. This creates powerful winds that can exceed 100 kilometers per hour. While Martian air density is so low that these winds carry very little force compared to equivalent winds on Earth, they could still disturb surface operations, move lightweight equipment, and sandblast exposed surfaces over time. I realise I have been presenting a comprehensive case for why Mars colonization faces enormous, potentially insurmountable challenges. Let me be fair to the other side and address the strongest arguments in favour of Mars colonization. Because intellectual honesty requires engaging with the best counter-arguments, not just the weak ones. The strongest argument is what we might call the general capability argument. It goes like this. Every technology I have described as insufficient or non-existent is merely a current limitation, not a physical impossibility. There is no law of physics that prevents radiation shielding. There is no law of physics that prevents closed-loop life support. There is no law of physics that prevents food production on Mars. All of these are engineering problems, and engineering problems get solved given sufficient time and resources. Therefore, Mars colonization is inevitable, only the timeline is uncertain. This argument has validity. It is true that the laws of physics do not prohibit Mars colonization. It is true that engineering problems often get solved. It is true that human history shows remarkable technological progress. I grant all of this. But the argument has a significant weakness. It conflates possibility with practicality. Many things are physically possible, but practically unachievable within any reasonable resource budget. It is physically possible to build a bridge from New York to London. No law of physics prevents it. But the resources required are so enormous, the engineering so complex, the purpose so questionable when alternatives exist, that no one seriously proposes it. Mars colonization may be in this category, physically possible, practically unachievable, within any time frame that matters for current decision-making. The second strongest argument is the inspiration argument. Mars colonization inspires young people to study science and engineering. It drives technology development. It gives civilization a unifying goal. It makes people care about space. And all of these things are genuinely valuable. I acknowledge this. Space exploration has always inspired, and Mars is a particularly compelling target for that inspiration. But inspiration can come from honest goals as well as dishonest ones. A permanent lunar base is inspiring. An asteroid mining operation is inspiring. A variable gravity space station is inspiring. Discovering microbial life on Europa or Enceladus would be the most inspiring discovery in human history. None of these require the dishonesty of pretending Mars colonization is imminent or straightforward. The third argument is the inevitability argument. Humans will eventually colonize Mars because it is in our nature to expand. We colonized every continent. We will colonize other worlds. It is destiny. This argument appeals to pattern recognition, but commits the fallacy of false analogy. Previous expansions were into environments that, however challenging, were fundamentally habitable. Every continent has breathable air, drinkable water, food sources, and livable temperatures at least some of the time. Mars has none of these. The pattern of terrestrial expansion does not predict success in a fundamentally different category of challenge. Having engaged with these counter-arguments fairly, I maintain that the weight of evidence strongly favours my thesis. Mars colonization as promoted in current discourse, with timelines of decades rather than millennia, with confidence rather than uncertainty, with inevitability rather than conditional possibility, is a distortion of scientific reality. It is, in the precise sense I have been developing throughout this analysis, a beautiful lie. Now, as we approach the final portion of this exploration, I want to address the question that has been building throughout. If Mars colonization is a beautiful lie, what is the beautiful truth? What should we actually be doing? What is the honest, scientifically grounded vision for humanity's relationship with space? I believe the beautiful truth is this. We live on the most extraordinary planet in the known universe, and our primary obligation is to understand it, protect it, and thrive on it. This does not mean we should abandon space. It means we should pursue space for the right reasons, and in the right ways. Space science, pure science, understanding the universe, searching for life, testing fundamental physics, mapping the cosmos, this is unambiguously valuable. The James Webb Space Telescope has revealed the early universe in unprecedented detail. The search for biosignatures on Mars, Europa, and Enceladus could answer the most profound question in science. Are we alone? Gravitational wave observatories are opening an entirely new window on the universe. These are genuine achievements that advance human knowledge and deserve full support. Space technology, using space to benefit Earth, is equally valuable. Weather satellites save thousands of lives annually through storm prediction. Communication satellites connect billions of people. Earth observation satellites monitor climate change, deforestation, agricultural health, and natural disasters. GPS enables modern transportation, agriculture, and emergency services. The practical benefits of space technology to Earth are enormous and well documented. Space resources. Developing the ability to mine asteroids and use space-based resources could eventually provide materials for both space and terrestrial use without the environmental damage of terrestrial mining. A single metallic asteroid could contain more platinum group metals than have ever been mined on Earth. Developing this capability is a legitimate long-term goal with potentially transformative benefits. Space habitats, as I discussed earlier, offer a path to human expansion in space that works with physics rather than against it. Orbital habitats with artificial gravity, radiation shielding, and controlled environments could eventually house large human populations in space, using resources from asteroids and the Moon. This is the form of space colonization that is most consistent with human biological needs. And then there is the Moon. The Moon is the obvious, logical, necessary next step for human space settlement. It is close. It has resources. It allows for incremental development with manageable risk. A permanent lunar presence would teach us everything we need to know about sustaining humans beyond Earth while remaining close enough for rescue and resupply. The fact that we are talking about Mars before we have established on the Moon tells us that the Mars narrative is driven by psychology and marketing rather than by engineering logic. The beautiful truth is less dramatic than the beautiful lie. It does not promise cosmic destiny on a 30-year timeline. It does not give us a new planet to escape to. It does not satisfy the frontier myth in the same emotionally satisfying way. But it is real. It is achievable. It is consistent with what we actually know about physics, biology, and engineering, and it does not distract us from the urgent work of protecting and restoring the only planet where humans can walk freely under open sky, breathe without machines, drink water from streams, and live as the biological creatures evolution made us to be. Let me close with a thought that I hope ties everything together. When we look up at Mars in the night sky, that faint red dot, we are looking at a world that was once more Earth-like than it is today. 4 billion years ago, Mars likely had a thicker atmosphere, liquid water on its surface, perhaps even the conditions for life. But Mars lost its magnetic field. Solar wind stripped its atmosphere. Its water evaporated or froze underground. Its surface became irradiated. It died. Mars is not our future. Mars is a warning. It shows us what happens to a habitable world when its protective systems fail. And right now, on Earth, we are actively degrading our own protective systems. We are altering our atmosphere. We are warming our climate. We are destroying biodiversity. We are depleting our soils. We are acidifying our oceans. We are not facing the cosmic catastrophe that killed Mars. We are doing it to ourselves. The true lesson of Mars is not that we should go there. The true lesson of Mars is that we should look at it and understand this is what a dead world looks like. This is what the absence of a living biosphere means. This is the end state of a planet that loses its life-sustaining systems. And we should resolve, with every fibre of our being, that this will not happen to Earth, not because we escaped to another world, but because we chose to protect this one. That is the beautiful truth. It is not as exciting as the beautiful lie. It does not promise adventure among the stars or cities on other worlds, but it promises something far more valuable: the continued flourishing of the only complex biosphere we know of in the entire universe. The continued existence of forests and oceans and birds and insects, and the unfathomable diversity of life that took 4 billion years to evolve. The continued ability of human beings to walk under open sky, to feel wind on their faces, to swim in rivers, to climb mountains, to live as part of a living world rather than imprisoned in a technological life support system on a dead one. Mars will always be there. If, in 1,000 years or 10,000 years, our technology has advanced to the point where colonization becomes practical and safe, our descendants can revisit the question. Nothing is lost by waiting. Everything is lost by diverting our attention and resources from the urgent, immediate, solvable problems that threaten the only home we have.